it's important that we research strange discoveries. It helps us to better understand the enormous reports found throughout the world and what they could mean for the scientific world around us. According to author Richard J. Dewhurst, he had come across a number of strange reports made during the early 1800s and up until the 1900s that described North American archaeological discoveries of giant humanoid skeletons and what was originally presumed to be a race of non-human creatures that seemed eerily similar to ancient descriptions of a race of giants. For some unknown reasons, the reports, data surrounding the reports, and discoveries taken in for research, such as skeletons, ancient artifacts, and references to the culture of giants, were either completely covered up, destroyed, or hidden from the public. One of the first reports made apparent to the author Richard Dewhurst were the overwhelming number of archaeological discoveries made by common people during the expansion of New York. The first report, titled A History of Livingston Country, New York, 1824, detailed the discovery of an indigenous people's burial mound that uncovered massive humanoid skeletons, and this was discovered by a man named Jesse Stanley. A portion of the report described the following statement. About the year 1820, the mound was removed, and in its removal arrowheads, a brass kettle, and knives were thrown out. A number of skeletons were also disinterred. Among the bones was a human skeleton of enormous size, the jawbone of which was so large that Adam Hollasander placed it over his own chin and jaw. He was the largest man in the settlement, and his face was in proportion to the rest of his body." End quote. As convincing as it might be to assume that the institute reporting the 1820 discovery had made an error in the proportions of the skeletons, or the exact size of the jawbone, hundreds of additional reports would be made surrounding different mounds discovered in the region. In another New York report titled A History of Western New York, 1804, that detailed the discovery of gigantic humanoid bones that were accurately measured and described by scientific sources, with the report quoted as providing the following statement: "Human bones of gigantic proportion were discovered in such a state of preservation as to be accurately described and measured. The cavities of the skulls were large enough in their dimensions to receive the entire head of a man in modern times, and could be put on one's head with as much ease as a hat or a cap. The jawbones were significantly large, and the fit was outside of a modern man's face. The other bones so far discovered appear to be of equal proportions with the skull and jawbones, several of which have been preserved in the cabinets of antiquarians, where they still may be seen." End quote. Oddly enough, as mentioned in this report, the skeletons were preserved, sent to museums and studied by archaeological experts of the time, and yet not a single giant humanoid skeleton can be viewed today, or found in any major Native American museums whatsoever. How could there be so many discoveries surrounding giant Native American skeletons, and yet none of them are on display today to be studied or viewed? As Richard Dewhurst continues throughout his book, he points to one organization deceiving the narrative throughout his life. Richard Dewhurst writes the following quote: "After the Civil War, the Smithsonian began to adopt a policy of excluding any evidence of direct foreign interference in the Americans prior to Columbus. Some have argued it was an attempt by the fractured post-war government to downplay any regional and ethnic conflicts in the still fragile national rebuilding after the war. Others have pointed to the expansionist policies incorporated in the Manifest Destiny and the desire to obscure the origins of the tribes being displaced and annihilated by Western expansion. Still, others have alleged that it was a direct religious policy adapted to counter the growing problem with the Mormon religion, and its assertions that the lost tribes of Israel were found in America." End quote. Could this mean that the Smithsonian Institution in its entirety worked to cover up the possible origins of humanoid giants? Or was it a far simpler explanation used to prevent the destruction of commonly held theories at the time? Dewhurst goes on to explain that throughout his studies, the majority of the evidence surrounding the Smithsonian active policies of excluding any gathered archaeological discoveries that did not confirm to their own narrative centers around one man, Major John Wesley Powell, a geologist of whom was directly responsible for many policies of exclusion of evidence. As it turns out, when the United States Congress first established the Bureau of Ethnology back in 1879, Major John Wesley was declared its first director, holding that position until his eventual passing away in 1902. The Bureau of Ethnology was created with the sole purpose of being responsible for the transferring of archives, records and materials relating to the Indians of North America from the Interior Department to the ownership of the Smithsonian Institution. It was during this time as director of the Bureau of Ethnology that Major John Wesley, seen as the lone expert of the geography of the American West, was asked to write up an extensive report surrounding the history of ancient tribes and their most likely origins. After finishing this report, rather than it be confirmed by other experts, archaeologists or explorers in their field, Major John quickly used his report as the official policy of the Smithsonian Institution, with little sway in its writings for the next 100 years. Additionally, John Wesley would write a report to the Secretary of the Smithsonian titled the following: on limitations to the use of some anthropological data, in which he actively asserted that there was no reason and no benefit to trying to discover the origins of North American native tribes. The report is directly quoted as saying the following: hints of customs may be discovered, but outside of this, the discoveries made have often been illegitimately used, especially with the purpose of connecting the tribes of North America with people of so-called races of antiquity in other portions of the world. In the study of these antiquities, there's been much unnecessary speculation in respect to the relaxation existing between the people to whose existence they attest, and the tribes of Indians inhabiting the country during this historic period. There is therefore no reason for us to search for an extra liminal origin through lost tribes for the arts discovered in the mounds of North America." End quote. Unfortunately, following these reports, the later 20th century secretary of the Smithsonian between 1907 and 1927, a man by the name of Charles Walcott, would adopt the Powell doctrine as the official stance of the Smithsonian Institute for the rest of the 20th century. In fact, even today the Powell doctrine is considered to be the official stance held by the Smithsonian, despite the fact that many modern-day archaeologists and historians are attempting to speak out in support of evidence of a wide number of settling attempts made prior to the European settlements of the 18th century. The author of the find, Richard Dewhurst, attributed the policy to evidence of an overwhelming cover-up of not only discoveries of giant humanoid skeletons all across North America, but of any artifacts that could imply past European origin or expansion into the New World, kept hidden prior to the colonization efforts made by Christopher Columbus. Even today, the currently held theory as to the origin of Native Americans is centered around a purely theoretical argument of past ice ages, having formed ice bridges connecting all continents of the world together, and allowed for the travel for Africa all the way to the Southern Americas, despite the lack of any evidence for this claim. Richard Dewhurst provided the following statement in his study surrounding the cover-up: "The great crime and tragedy of this policy is hard to compute. One glaring result has been the suppression of hundreds of out-of-context finds, all submitted to the museum in naive ignorance of the museum's official policy of suppression of alternative perspectives. To compound the problem, all major universities in the United States also adopt this policy, in conjunction with the official position of the Smithsonian, thus making it impossible to study alternative American history and receive any grants or funding for pursuits of this nature." End quote. Although it's impossible to find any of the recovered giant humanoid skeletons in the modern day, it has become apparent that an active cover-up has been taken by North American archaeological institutes, with a focus on disregarding any conflicting information or discoveries that put into question the validity of the Powell doctrine until private institutes make their own attempts to uncover the hidden Native American burial mounds that tend to hide giant humanoid skeletons all across the country. It appears that educational institutes will continue to cover up the truth for the foreseeable future. Another interesting discovery is the one made inside the Lovelock Caves. A group of archaeologists from the University of California discovered a number of strange objects inside the Lovelock Caves. Among the objects were mummies of red-haired giants. These mummies were said to be between 8 and 10 feet tall. As they were found in the Lovelock Cave, these giants were given the name of the Lovelock Giants. The archaeologists also discovered a pair of large sandals, far too large to fit an average human's feet. These sandals were 15 inches long, and they had signs showing that they were once worn by someone. Researchers also discovered a handprint on one of the stones in the Lovelock Cave. The imprint came from a massive hand. Many of the items found in the Lovelock Cave are held today in different museums, and also private collections. In 1931, 2 large skeletons of red-haired giants were found buried close to Lovelock Cave. These amazing discoveries have led many people to believe that at one point in time, giant humans once walked our planet. So what do you think of these archaeological discoveries surrounding impossible to explain humanoid giant skeletons found all across North America, and the strange cover-up of conflicting archaeological discoveries made by the Smithsonian Institute and subsequently the entire field of North American studies? Be sure to leave your questions and answers in the comment section below, and help us to grow this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.